he never actually ruled China. Not really. Even when he sat on the dragon throne. Even when the court bowed. Even when his name carried the title of emperor. The decisions weren't his. They were hers. And everyone in that room knew it. They just never said it out loud. Because in the Forbidden City, power didn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it watched from behind a curtain. And by the time you realized where it was already too late. Imagine being 17 years old. Pulled from everything familiar. Transported into a palace so vast. So deliberate in its architecture of control. That even the corridors were designed to remind you of your place. You are not royalty. You are not important. You are one of dozens of young women selected for the imperial court. A concubine. A number. A name that the palace hadn't decided yet whether to remember. This was Cixi in 1851. No crown. No authority. No guarantee of survival. Just another girl in an empire that had perfected the art of replacing people quietly. Girls arrived. Served. Faded. Disappeared before their names mattered. And yet, even in those early years, even in that silence, Cixi was watching. Not passively. Not fearfully. Strategically. Because she understood something that the other women around her had not yet learned. In a place where no one is truly safe, visibility is weakness. So she didn't fight for attention. She didn't compete loudly. She didn't reach for things before she was ready to hold them. She waited. Watched. Learned how the system breathed. Who spoke, and who was listened to. Who held titles, and who held influence. Because those two things, in the Forbidden City, were never the same. When she gave birth to a son in 1856, everything changed. Not immediately. Nothing in the Forbidden City ever changed immediately. But the balance shifted. Quietly. Dangerously. Because now, she wasn't just another woman in the palace. She was the mother of the future emperor. And in a court built on hierarchy. On bloodline. On the architecture of succession. That made her impossible to ignore. The Emperor Xianfeng looked at her differently now. Not with affection alone. With calculation. She had given him something no political alliance could guarantee. An heir. And in doing so, she had given herself something far more valuable. Leverage. Emperor Xianfeng died in 1861. And with him died any illusion that the transition of power would be peaceful. Her son, Zichuan, was placed on the throne. 5 years old. Too young to hold a brush. Too young to understand what was being placed in his hands. Which meant someone else would have to hold it for him. Officially, the regents were 8 men. Experienced. Established. Hand-selected by the dying emperor himself. Men who had spent their lives inside the machinery of imperial China. Men who believed, fully, that power now belonged to them. They were wrong. What happened next wasn't a battle. There was no army mobilized. No blood in the corridors. No dramatic night of chaos that history could point to as the moment. The coup happened in silence. In careful messages passed through trusted hands. In alliances formed in rooms where no record was kept. In the quiet coordination between Cixi and Prince Gong, the emperor's uncle, a man who understood that power shared with Cixi was safer than power contested against her. The 8 regents were called to account. Su Han, the most powerful among them, was arrested. He was executed publicly. Beheaded in the marketplace. A deliberate, visible message in a palace that usually preferred invisible ones. The others were stripped of their seals. Their authority dissolved. Some were sent into exile. Some were simply erased from relevance. And when it was over, the two Empresses Dowager Cixi and the emperor's other widow were granted the right to rule as co-regents. In practice, Cixi ruled alone. Because power, once you understand how to hold it, doesn't require sharing. She governed from behind a yellow silk screen. This was not metaphor. This was literal. Imperial protocol prevented a woman from being seen conducting official court business directly. So Cixi sat behind the screen, invisible. And yet every minister in that room addressed her. Every memorial, the formal documents of imperial governance, passed through her hands. Every edict issued in the young emperor's name was composed by her. She had found a way to be the center of power, while officially occupying no center at all. It was perhaps the most sophisticated political maneuver in the history of Chinese imperial rule. Years passed. The boy emperor, Tongji, grew. And as he grew, the question that no one dared ask out loud grew with him. Would she step back? When he came of age in 1873 and officially took the throne as an adult ruler, Cixi appeared to retire. Appeared. Because the distance between the throne room and her private chambers was not as large as anyone pretended. Tongji died in 1875. Suddenly. At 19. Smallpox, the official record stated. But in the Forbidden City, official records and truth had never been formally introduced. He left no heir. And Cixi, in the hours immediately following his death, made a decision that violated the most fundamental rules of imperial succession. She selected the next emperor herself. Not from the generation below Tongji, which protocol demanded, but from the same generation. A 3-year-old boy named Zetian. Her nephew. Why? Because a child from the next generation down would have meant Cixi became a grandmother figure by imperial title, with far less formal authority. A child from the same generation meant she remained Empress Dowager, in control. The choice was legally questionable, morally disputed, contested immediately by members of the court. Cixi made it anyway. And when she made it, no one stopped her. Because by now, everyone understood the rules. The boy, now the Guangxu emperor, grew up inside a palace that Cixi controlled completely. And yet, he was not nothing. He read. He studied. He watched what was happening beyond the palace walls. And what he saw frightened him. China was losing. Not in one decisive battle, but slowly, consistently. In treaties signed under pressure. In ports surrendered. In territories yielded. In wars that should never have been lost. Japan, which China had long considered a lesser nation, had modernized rapidly and defeated China in 1895. The humiliation was total. And Guangxu, unlike the court around him, understood why. China was being held in place by a system that refused to evolve. In the summer of 1898, he acted. Over the course of 100 days, he issued a cascade of reform edicts. Modernized the military. Reform the education system. Restructure the bureaucracy. Open China to new ideas. Break the grip of the old guard. For a brief, electric moment, it looked like China might actually change. Like an emperor might finally rule. Reformers celebrated. Intellectuals rallied. The air inside the court shifted. Cixi watched all of it. From behind whatever curtain she had chosen that season. And she waited. Until she was certain of what she was seeing. Then she moved. On September 21, 1898. 100 days after the reforms began. The Guangxu emperor was arrested. Not by an enemy. Not by a foreign power. By his own court. At Cixi's order. He was taken to the Ocean Terrace, a small island pavilion inside the imperial lake, and placed under house arrest. Confined inside his own palace. Surrounded by walls he had once believed were his. Alive. But no longer present. The reform edicts were cancelled. Every single one. 6 of the reformers who had advised the emperor were captured. Tan Sitong, the one who had been warned and had the chance to flee, refused to run. He was arrested. Brought before the court. And executed along with 5 others. Before he died, he reportedly said, "I am willing to shed my blood if China may be saved. But I fear my death will be in vain." He was right to fear it. Because after that day, no one in the Forbidden City was confused about what reform meant. It meant danger. It meant elimination. It meant standing across from Cixi. And no one wanted to stand across from Cixi. The years that followed were among the most turbulent in Chinese history. The Boxer Rebellion. The foreign armies that marched into Beijing. The humiliating flight of the court from the capital. The unequal treaties. The steady erosion of everything the dynasty had built. And through all of it, Cixi remained. Adapting when she had to. Conceding when she had no choice. But never, not once, releasing the center. Near the end of her life, she even began implementing the very reforms she had crushed in 1898. Whether from genuine understanding of what China needed, or from the recognition that the empire was finally beyond saving without them, history cannot cleanly answer. On November 14, 1908, the Guangxu emperor died. He was 37 years old. The cause was given as natural illness. But modern forensic testing, conducted nearly a century later on samples from his tomb, found arsenic in his remains. Lethal levels. Consistent with deliberate poisoning. No one was ever charged. No investigation was ever opened. No verdict was ever delivered. Because the very next day, November 15, 1908, Cixi died too. She was 72. And in her final hours, she named the next emperor. A 2-year-old boy. Even at the end. Even with death already present in the room. She was still deciding. She left behind an empire 3 years from collapse. The dynasty she had spent her entire life controlling fell in 1911. And what followed was a century of debate that historians still haven't resolved. Was she the reason China failed to modernize in time? Or was she the only thing holding the dynasty together long enough for it to even try? Was she protecting China? Or protecting herself? Because everything she did, every coup, every reform crushed, every emperor confined, every death that arrived one day too conveniently, can be read both ways. And perhaps that is the most unsettling thing about Empress Dowager Cixi. Not the cruelty. Not the control. Not even the arsenic. But the fact that you cannot draw a clean line. You cannot look at her life and say, here is the villain. Because the same hands that imprisoned an emperor also held an empire together for nearly half a century. The same mind that executed reformers eventually ordered reform. The same woman who entered the palace as no one left it as the last person to truly rule China. She didn't raise armies. She didn't lead rebellions. She didn't make speeches. She simply never let go. And in the end, that was enough. Until it wasn't.